So welcome, my dear friends, to this very interesting evening. We are going to talk today about very intriguing and important subject for all of us, which we probably some of us, such as I am, we don't realize how important it is. We are talking about the finance and women in finance.
Thank you very much for your lovely introduction. So, by way of background, we're all aware that women are increasingly owning wealth in the world, and the current statistic is around 40% of total private wealth in the world is now owned by women. And that's growing by about 7% every year. And women are inheriting wealth, they're earning wealth, they are controlling wealth, either that they're widowed or divorced. And in 2014 at UBS, we realised that that the whole face of wealth was beginning to change, and that we really needed to understand female clients and better serve them. And we did a lot of research which showed that women do have different attitudes to finance compared to men. And this led us on a journey. And if we move on to the next slide, I've just put some points here around how men and women are different in the way that they invest. And when it comes to women's approach to investing and finance in general, we know that women are more disciplined investors than men. But also they have some specific issues. So when it comes to language, women do get very put off by financial jargon in the same way as legal jargon. And also that values are very important when it comes to investing. So they're much more likely to invest in social impact funds, so worthy causes and funds that really change the world. And also that 41% of women really don't have financial confidence. That's less than half of all women. And at this point, I'd just like to talk a little bit more about, if we can just move on, because it's important. And it's important because the top piece here, this top picture, is what we think life is going to be like when we start off. We think it's going to be plain sailing. But the reality of life is not that. Unfortunately not.
Yeah.
So it's important to have confidence when it comes to managing your money. And if we move on to the next slide, you can see that your financial journey is more likely to be smoother with confidence. And when we looked into the whole area of financial confidence with women, we found that there were three key aspects that really stood out, and they were trust, awareness, and expertise. So it's those three areas that we use to define financial confidence. And with awareness, we mean, which direction am I going? Where do I want to go with my finances? Expertise, how do I read the lay of the land on my financial journey? And then the whole trust area, so who can really help me to navigate my way through that journey. So as part of our work at UBS, we have created a workbook, which is going to be in all your packs when you leave, but it's looks like this, and it basically talks you through the different aspects of finances, and it's got a great financial glossary at the back, so a jargon-free glossary to really help you get started. Because if you move on one more, when we looked in detail into financial confidence, we found that a lot of women really struggle to get started. They just didn't know how to get over the first hurdle in terms of understanding their finances. So we hope that this book really will help you. and to really help you define your financial compass, if you like, on your journey. Okay, moving on. So around those three different areas, trust and awareness and expertise, we've put together some questions. So when it comes to awareness, preparation is key for every great journey. So asking yourself what you want to achieve on that journey, how might key life decisions impact your ability to achieve your goals, and how would I be affected if something unexpected were to happen in my life? And the next one, expertise. So the best explorers use their compass effectively. How does inflation affect my investments? How does the business cycle affect my wealth? And what is my financial personality? And then the last area, trust. Finding an advisor who can help me. How can they help me? Which questions should I ask? And who can I trust? So those three aspects of financial confidence, really important. So as well as this book, we also put together an online tool. It's a financial confidence test, and it allows you to understand what your financial personality is. So we're going to ask Luba to be a guinea pig.
Do I have a choice?
We're going to explore.
Don't laugh, please.
We're going to explore this, okay, together.
I warn you, I know nothing, okay?
So this is what it looks like if you Google ubs.com/financial confidence. You'll come onto this page. So, and then you take the self-assessment, that's right. So first name?
First name is Luba. I am 55/64. Not quite yet. What do you do? I do, I'm self-employed. What is the most important in your life? Family, of course. Okay.
Okay, now you can start.
I know my goals in life and how much money I need to achieve them.
So you dial up. You dial up or down.
Help the audience. Please help me.
Totally agree or totally disagree.
Oh my God. Okay, in the middle. No, I definitely know my goals, but I don't know how much money do I need to achieve them. Never thought about this actually. Sorry. UBS.
Okay, and then
okay.
Do the tick.
But I totally, Vice, I think we should correct it because I totally agree that I need to know this. I'm sorry, I misinterpreted. So I agree totally, almost, that we need to know this. Yes.
Okay.
I know how much money I earn and spend. In the middle.
Up or down a bit?
A bit down.
A bit down. Okay.
A bit down.
Okay.
Oh my God. Yes. Okay. I know how unexpected events can affect my finances. Yeah, this one I know, but yeah, that doesn't help.
Okay.
Yes, you can stop here. Yes. I know how my big decisions in life can affect my finances. Okay, so a little bit higher up, but not too high. Yeah, somewhere here. Mm-hmm. I know how to grow my money. No. Somewhere there. Yes. I know how things like inflation and interest rates can affect my finances. Okay, I'll explain the reasons afterwards. Okay, you can put it somewhere a bit down. Yes, like the here, please. Yes. I know what information I need to understand my investments. What information I need to understand my investments? No. Again, a little bit down. Stop here. Yes. A little bit. I know what information I need to understand my investments. We finished with this. Yes, that is okay. I know how to balance saving money and paying off my debts. I have no idea, but okay, a little bit lower. Here. I know how to find the information I need about my investments. This one I think I in the middle, because I know where, at least I know already two persons where I can go. I know how to find a financial advisor I can trust. Yes, totally. Yeah, this one I think that I'm not in that bad. Yes, something like this. Yes. I know what to ask a financial advisor in the middle. At least I can explain the situation. I know how to protect my data online. No, this one I don't know. Okay. I'm a wanderer, you see?
Yes. Yeah.
But can I explain myself, because it sounds awful. Because all these things that you ask, my husband knows.
Yes. This is the challenge.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So this is why we need to work on financial confidence, and we're going to share a little bit more research with you in a minute.
Can we ask him to come now?
Well, yes, I think that's part of it. You know, us thinking about.
Unfortunately, he's even not in London, so he can't come really quickly. Okay, thank you very much. It was very useful. Yes. Okay.
So, if we can go back to the presentation and onto the next slide, there are actually 8 different persona types in the test, and they're all based on those, you know, the varying degrees of trust, awareness, and expertise that define financial confidence. For example, a wanderer is low in everything. So a wanderer is low in trust,
at least in something, okay? Finance is not my strength.
But the whole the reason for the test really is to give you some direction, and then on the tool you then are given a bit of information so that you can actually get started. So you can see how really understanding your financial personality can help you on your journey to the next stage. So let's move now from financial confidence to financial well-being, and how important it is that we're actively involved in financial decision-making in our families. So this was actually a piece of research. I've put a few copies around the room. That we conducted. We launched it in March this year, and it was really we talked to women all around the world to understand, you know, what their approach to financial well-being is, and how involved in financial decision making they actually are. And there's some quite startling statistics in there which I'd like to share with you.
Vaita, please speak.
Next one. So we know that women are living longer. Their life expectancy is longer than a man's, and on average, in certain regions around the world, you know, we're going to live into our 90s. And 68% of women here believe that they'll also outlive their spouse. And we know from our research that 76% of women worry about retirement planning, so they worry about their long-term security. And that's actually a trend we see generally. You know, women tend to worry about the future and security, particularly for their families. And men tend to see money as an opportunity cost. How can I make more money? With this in mind, women are placing particular importance on their long-term financial needs. But actually, if you look at the next slide here, this slide, you can see that they're only really involved in the short-term financial decision making. So they're managing day-to-day expenses, participating in large purchasing decisions, paying bills, etc. And they're opting out of those longer-term financial decisions that they're actually worrying about. So here we are, 58% of women say that my spouse takes the lead. Only 23% say that they take the lead. 19% say we share decisions equally, which is good, because if you take what I just said about women worrying about long-term thinking about long-term investing, and men wanting to make money quickly and thinking about the short term, you can see how together they could make some good financial decisions. So if we move on, of that 19% who are making decisions together, there's some great benefits to doing that. So 95% say that if something happens to my spouse, I'll already know all about my finances. 94% I'm more confident about our financial future. 93% we make fewer mistakes with both of us involved. 91% I'm less stressed about our finances. So the research is really saying, it's important for your financial well-being, your well-being generally, if you're involved in decision making. And then we also surveyed some women who had become suddenly single, so they were widows or divorcees. And here again, some startling statistics around 74% of women who hadn't been involved in the financial decisions found some negative financial surprises. 76% wish they had been more involved, and 77% encourage women to take a more active role in their finances. So with the wisdom of hindsight, women are encouraging other women to become more involved, wishing that they had been themselves.
Very good of them, of thinking about the others, yes? Look, 77%
yes,
advise us to think about it.
Yeah.
Подумайте об этом.
So at this point, I think I'm going to hand over to
Miranda?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Please say if you can't hear me. I have quite a quiet voice, so I'll try to talk loudly so you can hear what I'm going to say. Obviously, as Luba has said, I am a divorce lawyer or family law practitioner. That's my subject of specialism in law. And what I thought I would do is try to bring to life some of the conversations that we're having now about women's financial confidence. Obviously, I deal with a lot of female clients who very often haven't really understood the financial position during the marriage. And so when I come into their lives, I'm very often trying to help them understand their family financial and asset position, trying to understand the financial disclosure which their husband is obliged to produce as part of the proceedings that I deal with, and also trying to help them understand the assets that are in their own name if they don't already. And this, is a sweeping generalisation. I think the research the UBS research project obviously has demonstrated that a lot of women don't understand very much about their financial position. I think we would probably all agree there's a spectrum, and some of the clients I see or deal with are experienced businesswomen. They do have a good understanding of their own financial position. Some, it certainly depends on the nature of their marriage, the ethos of their marriage. But I would say, on balance, a lot of the women that I act for, there's a mix, but a lot of the women I act for don't have very much understanding, and maybe haven't really had any control over the financial position. Maybe they've never even had their own bank account, or they would have no idea how to set up paying the gas bill, or things which are actually quite fundamental aspects of running your own home rather than relying on someone else to do it for you. And so I thought I would try to bring this to life a little bit. This is really teeny tiny writing, so I will read out a case study which we've worked on to try to bring to life some of the issues that we're talking about, where women perhaps through the divorce process don't necessarily understand the financial position, what will happen during the divorce process, which might make it important that they do come to understand their financial position later personally. And also, and this is very much where Elena will come into this, we wanted also to look at how women deal with financial aspects of for their family generally. So it's not just about the woman herself, but also about her children, thinking about her children's future, maybe her children entering into marriage with somebody else, or succession planning for the future for children as well, which I think, I'm not saying that husbands and fathers don't focus on their children's futures too, but the research shows that it's very much a focus for women, particularly for mothers and wives. So just for a flavour of the sort of case that, I mean, these are circumstances that I've pulled out and put together from cases that I've dealt with over the past few years. In this scenario, we have Boris and Natasha, who they divorced in Russia.
А не Борис, а Наташа here.
Some cliches.
Но Борис точно есть. Был. Борис уже был. Sorry.
So Boris and Natasha divorced in Russia, followed by followed by Part 3 proceedings in England, and I'm going to come on to talk about what Part 3 proceedings are in England. So initial divorce in Russia, followed by proceedings in England for financial provision for Natasha 5 years ago. Natasha was aged 50 at the time of the divorce. She's now 55, exactly. Boris much older, obviously. Oh yeah, they have one daughter, Ekaterina, now aged 30. Family moved to England, or at least Natasha and Ekaterina moved to England 10 years ago. That was 5 years before they divorced. This was Boris's idea. He wanted to set up a home in London for the family. He would travel, come to England, spend time with the family. Ekaterina would be educated. So yeah. Boris stayed primarily in Russia, where his business is located. And a broad family wealth of £200 million in this particular case, including property in London, investments in Switzerland and elsewhere. Boris in control of the finances during the marriage, very much. Natasha didn't really know very much about the finances. In the Part 3 proceedings in England, she obtains approximately 60 million out of the 200 million family wealth. And I'll come on to talk about the Part 3 proceedings and how that might happen in this country. Ekaterina, their daughter, has been married for 8 years. She has 2 children aged 5 and 3 years. She's in the midst of divorce proceedings herself in England from George, her English husband, who is an investment banker. And to her parents' horror, she now has a penniless 26-year-old French boyfriend, Jean-Pierre, who's very good looking and funny. And unfortunately, she has plans to marry him as soon as her degree absolute is pronounced. So Boris and Natasha, neither of them are happy about. They are united in their dislike of Jean-Pierre. They've brought them back together. Can we move on to the next slide? Thank you. So this is why I have a job, partly, is that...
Thanks to all these people.
Why I am so busy. London has become known as the divorce capital of the world in the general media. And that's not really to say that people are desperately unhappy in London and they all desperately want to get divorced as soon as they set foot in England. It's more about the way our system in England has developed, our legal system, as far as family law is concerned, and why we have become known as one of the most generous, if not the most generous, jurisdictions in the world for the weaker financial party, usually the wife, in a scenario where the husband is in control of the asset position. In my own personal practice, I qualified in 1999, so I'm 20 years qualified this year. I feel great about saying that. I can finally say to you, I have 20 years experience as a specialist family lawyer, which is quite a long period of time. But the law dramatically changed in England the year after I qualified as a solicitor in the year 2000. And so, although for about a year as a 1-year newly qualified specialist family lawyer, I was dealing with cases in one way, we have this case in the year 2000 which radically changes our law and brings into English law the concept of sharing assets. And what we, in England, if there are divorce proceedings here, then the first job, for my first job, is to work out what the matrimonial assets, what we call the marital request, what the assets are in the case. So my first job is to work out through disclosure and various my own investigatory means with assistance is to work out what the marital assets are. Because my objective in cases which I'm dealing with for the most part in England is to work out what my client's share of the assets are from a very early stage. Now, since 2000, when the family law in England dramatically changed here, had Boris and Natasha been dealing with if they were an English case, pure English couple, and they were going through a divorce in England, the court would likely have approached that case in looking at an asset position of £200 million accumulated during the course of the marriage. Whether it was through Boris's business activities would not really matter if Natasha was entirely a stay-at-home mother and wife, because the business accumulated during the course of the marriage and the value of it is a matrimonial asset and falls to be divided potentially equally. The starting position is equality of division, regardless of the roles of husband and wife, and this is where we get this concept of sharing of marital assets between husband and wife from. Since the White case, the change in the law in the year 2000, there have been different developments in our law, and one of the principles of English family law is that inherited wealth, so for example in Ekaterina's case, where she is going through her divorce from her English banker husband George, who she's been married to for 8 years, any family wealth which has been put into her name by her parents, so if they've gifted her property, if they've given her a house, importantly, in those circumstances, if she's well advised, she firstly would have had a prenuptial agreement with George, which we will come on to, but she would be well advised to keep inherited wealth, her family property, separate, not putting it into joint names with her husband, not putting a family home, for example, if she was gifted that by her parents, into joint names with her husband, and also not putting money into a joint bank account with her husband or an investment portfolio into joint names. There is a strong principle of English family law which I think reflects our own history as a nation and the way the mentality of our judges in this jurisdiction is to respect the principle that family or inherited wealth should be kept by the person who obtained that wealth from their family, other family members, and it shouldn't be automatically subject to the sharing principle of English family law. So in Ekaterina's case, going through her divorce from husband George, we would be looking at a position where if she'd been gifted assets by her parents, that in those circumstances they would not automatically be shared. I think in Ekaterina, in Boris and Natasha's case, I talked about Part 3 proceedings, which are where a divorce has happened in an overseas jurisdiction. And again, this is a developing area of law, has really developed since the year 2000, since we established the sharing principle. And very often you will see comments in the media, reports about forum shopping in this jurisdiction. So usually the wife, but the weaker financial party, coming to England after an overseas divorce has taken place to try to have further financial provision. And it's very interesting. I said earlier on that I wouldn't talk about in any great detail about case law but it is quite interesting what's been happening recently in this jurisdiction, in that if you look at the reported cases here, the majority of these reported cases involve divorce proceedings which either took place in Russia or Russian-speaking jurisdictions, or quite often in the Middle East and the Middle East jurisdictions. And the reason for that, I think, reflects the fact that we have very strong Russian and Middle Eastern communities living in London, which is why, because we can establish jurisdiction for cases here, because people actually live here, they own property here and are connected to this jurisdiction from those jurisdictions where wealthy families often come from. And that's why we have this more common occurrence of proceedings involving parties from those jurisdictions. But I think also it's because we have certain regulations within the European Union, we're members at the moment, we don't know quite what will happen, which means that it's not possible to bring these Part 3 proceedings, financial proceedings, after an overseas divorce where an EU jurisdiction is involved. And obviously we have many members of different European Union communities living in London as well. Post-Brexit, might that change if the rules change and it's possible to bring financial provision after a divorce in Spain or France or Germany? It might well change. We might see more reported cases involving them. But at the moment, if you look at the reported cases, I'd say even possibly the majority of them are Russian cases.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that those cases have developed is rather than sharing assets, and this is why in my example, Natasha only gets 60 million and doesn't get 100 million. The way Part 3 proceedings have developed, it's quite common the court will not approach those cases in a 50-50 sharing way as a starting point. The court will generally look more at whether one party's needs are met or whether there should be a reduction from 50% to 25% or 33% of the asset position, because the English court is not starting the case afresh with divorce proceedings, but is looking at financial provision after an overseas divorce, so the divorce having taken place in the foreign jurisdiction, and another court already having ruled on what the division of assets should be. I thought it would also be helpful and relevant to my scenario. I think we might have skipped the prenuptial agreement slide. I don't know if you can go back.
Yeah.
Sorry. So I mentioned, and this is certainly where Elena and I very often advise clients together, it's about... don't worry.
Nobody knows.
It's fine. I didn't know. It's about prenuptial and postnuptial agreements. This is part of asset protection measures, very often trying to understand your how you can assist your family members, particularly children. If children are getting married, for example, in the case of Boris and Natasha, where Ekaterina is unfortunately about to remarry to Jean-Pierre, she'll be very well advised to have a prenuptial agreement. And this is very much about protection of family wealth. So we look at asset protection measures. Pre- and postnuptial agreements are a very important part of that. Again, our law changed dramatically here in 2012 with a highly publicised case. Now, prenuptial agreements and postnuptial agreements are really well worth doing, and the court will uphold a pre- or postnuptial agreement, provided that both parties have understood the implications of the agreement when they entered into it. And what we focus on to make sure that both parties understand it is for there to be legal advice on both sides and for both parties to understand the financial position of the other. Again, this is a circumstance where if you're entering into a prenuptial agreement yourself, you need to understand your own financial position and that of your husband-to-be. And it's interesting to me that if you do have a prenuptial agreement at the start of marriage, you have explained to you, if you're entering into it, your husband's financial position at that point in time. But thereafter, during the marriage, perhaps women, if they lose confidence, no longer have conversations about the financial position of the husband, and that changes quite dramatically. There's quite an important change there. And at that point, I think women perhaps lose sight of what the position is currently, having started the marriage out, knowing very well what their husband's financial position was if they had a prenuptial agreement at the time. I thought it would also be helpful, if you want to move on to the next slide, to touch on, if you go flip straight to the one after this one actually, because thank you. So as far as unmarried couples are concerned, this is very often something, I think there's a misperception if a couple is living together, that they have claims against each other. And I thought it might be helpful just to touch on this, because this is another area where sometimes a woman will come in to see me who's been living with her partner for 17 years. They've had 2 children. And she really has very little claims at all for herself. And this is something that I think a lot of women don't necessarily understand. That women believe there is a concept of something called a common law spouse, which is something that is repeated to me quite often. It doesn't exist. It's a myth. In this jurisdiction, there is no such thing as a common law wife. And a woman who is not married has very limited claims indeed, unless she's put money into a property or venture with her partner. She will have no claims at all to the property itself. She has to have made a capital contribution to that property for us to make claims under trust law to obtain a share of the property. She also has no right to maintenance for herself at all. So even if she's been maintained by her partner, her boyfriend, living with that man for the last 17 years, she can't claim anything from him. He's no obligation to pay her because they're not married. A woman who has a child has claims for the benefit of the child. So she's entitled to a house until the child leaves home, finishes university, but then goes back to the husband. She has no claims on it. I brought a case to the court about 8 years ago now for a client who had separated from a man with unlimited means. It was a Middle Eastern family, and we tried to argue in that case that she should at least have the house at the end of the term when she would be left with nothing, and he had unlimited resources and could easily give this to her. And the court said no, even though the legislation that Parliament implemented in this particular area doesn't preclude a mother from obtaining the house outright. The way the case law has developed in this country by judges making different decisions has gone against that and has said, no, the woman must give the house back at the end to the father. I think there'll come a case, I hope, where this is overturned, and maybe it will go to the Supreme Court in this country, or Parliament will legislate. But at the moment, get nothing. So the answer is, it's very important to get married, to have an agreement. I have just, in fact, interestingly, dealt with an agreement for a father who wanted to have a boyfriend. He wanted to have children with his girlfriend. She very sensibly, in my view, although I did not really share this with him, said to him, I'd love to have children with you, and you don't want to get married. That's fine. I'm not bothered about marriage. But if we're going to do this, I want to know that I'm financially secure for the rest of my life because I'm having your children and I'm losing the opportunity to work as much as I currently do now and develop my own career. I'm losing the opportunity to marry somebody else. And you don't want to get married because you're just not interested. So I'd like us please to have an agreement in which if we separate and we have children, you don't take the house back at the end. I get that outright. You pay me a lump sum, or in that case we agreed in the end on £5 million that she would receive if they separated at any point after giving birth to their first child. And then we increase the amount. We agreed to an increase per child. And that's the first one I've done of those. But I do think this will become increasingly common because now I think the statistic is more than half of children in this country are born outside marriage. So
more than half
in this country now. I mean, you're including a huge span but now that is the statistic, that more than half. A lot of people just aren't interested in marriage. I think this kind of, comes and goes. I think there will be a fashion for it given Meghan and Harry's wedding, and, people are quite into the idea of marriage, etc. But now I think that now these agreements, which are not prenuptial agreements, but they're pre-having children agreements, certainly for the protection of women and mothers, this is really something to think about. Because in a case where you are entering into this relationship, which is going to impact on you for the rest of your life, it is very important to know that not only your children's financial future is protected, but also the woman herself is protected. And at the moment, unless the law changes in this country for cohabitants, and there are endless consultations about this, all of which have resulted in no government really having an appetite to pursue it because they always get accused of undermining marriage by giving cohabitants the same rights as married couples. And so this is always the answer. There may be legislation in the future. Because of Brexit, I doubt that will happen for over a decade by the time. So at the moment, it is still really important to think about your financial future and how you will protect your own financial position if you have children with a man. And now I would like to hand over to Elena, if we move on to the next slide, to talk a little bit about succession planning.
When we were thinking about very important legal issues underpinning this issue of control, women controlling their finances, we thought it would be incomplete if we would not say literally a few words about succession. And succession is a very important topic in itself and very, very complex one. And probably not the most pleasant to talk about, but I think we ought to mention this because the message is women are concerned about their future, they're concerned about their finances, and they're worried. The answer to it is action plan, do something about it, be in control. And from what we can see, women quite often are more in control of this issue of succession planning, and they're actually pushing their husbands to make decisions about what happens if we're not around, because they're the ones who are concerned about their children. And we can see this all the time. And in a way, they're just more down to earth and they say, let's do it. I want this risk to be covered and move on. And I believe it's the right approach because it gives women peace of mind, and they understand that those family members who need protection the most, i.e. their children, are protected. It seems to be really daunting. What does it mean, succession planning? Where do I start? But actually, as with all truly complex things, you can break it down to quite simple things, which normally affects everybody. And the points are: who takes? Who are my close family members who I would like to inherit after me? Who is in charge? We have to appreciate that it is a process, putting information about assets together and so on, and distributing them to the beneficiaries. But also it is important to mention that minor children, for instance, can't own assets under English law. So until the age of 18, someone should look after their assets for them. And yes, they can make distributions, but they are very important people. And who are they going to be? This is actually something to think about. And when certain steps should be taken place. Sometimes people believe that maybe it's good actually to do it during your lifetime, to redistribute your assets while you're still around. But there is another important side to it. Would you like your children to inherit your wealth at 18, or is it too early? It's a very good question to ask, and we've seen various answers from 18 to 30, because some women believe that especially their boys, they're not ready yet, even at 25. So once you've answered these questions, there are various legal tools in place. Basically, that's where we lawyers are coming in, and this is nothing but technical help, really. That's how you can achieve what you want. You can either put a property in joint names. We've heard maybe it's not a good idea.
This is where the conflict between tax and succession planning.
Or succession planning comes in, yes. As usual, various answers to the same question. Wills and intestacy rules. So will is a very important document. It's basically, that's your control over your assets, because you can rely on intestacy rules, which means succession rules established by law in different jurisdictions. But it can lead to quite unpredictable results sometimes. And unless they are fully appreciated, actually, maybe it's better to avoid this. And we also have to understand that question where the assets are located is a very important question as well, because if, let's say, it's a movable property, a house, it will be governed by the laws of the country where the asset is located. And yes, you can, of course, change this by your will, but if you don't, the results can be, surprising sometimes. Trusts and similar structures, quite a complex instrument, but the whole idea is you hand over control over your asset to someone else, someone you trust, of course. It can be a professional trustee if we're talking about discretionary trusts, but it can be your relative if we're thinking about trust established by your will. So it comes as a surprise that quite often our clients don't appreciate that actually they can say, no, I don't want my children to inherit when they're just 18, but I would like my relatives or elder children to look after these assets until, let's say, they're 25. and they don't need necessarily to involve professional people and big trust company to do that. So there are mechanisms in place which would help you to achieve what you want once you've answered all these questions, and your professional advisor can certainly help with this. Inheritance tax, I ought to mention this because tax is important, and as you know, it does exist in this country, and the rate is 40%, and absolute majority of my clients believe it is utterly unfair. However, it is what it is, and inheritance tax exists not only in England but in many other jurisdictions, and certainly we have to be aware of this when we do our planning. And we need to appreciate the rules, we need to appreciate there are exemptions, and here in England one of the most interesting ones and valuable ones is a spouse exemption. Spouse is the only beneficiary which takes tax-free, and whether it is good or not, generally, it is something not to be overlooked. So when you think about succession planning, 3 points really to take on board. Think about following our talk. Your global plan, assets in different jurisdictions, quite complex family situation probably, different instruments, maybe there are trusts in place. It all should fit together. It should be one strategy, one clear picture for you. Tax is important. It's important to understand how it can bite. However, your succession plan should go first. Who you would like to protect? Who should take at the end? These questions are more important than tax because you can almost always find some solution for a tax issue. And then, of course, it is not something you can set in stone because family dynamics change. What does it mean? Children grow up, they get married, they get divorced occasionally. So what was right 5 years ago doesn't seem to be right anymore. So it is something to think of from time to time. And of course, it is something to think of when something dramatic like divorce happens in the family. So if we will just look at our case study, what is happening here? All our family members probably will answer these questions differently. So parents, if we'll start with them, they've got divorced 5 years ago. What happened since then? Probably they've got their new partners. Are they married or not? If they're not married, then their unmarried partner is equally unprotected if something happens to them. And actually, we're seeing quite a few female clients who just don't want to get married for this or that reason. It is not really important for them. They have children from previous relationships, and they want their partner actually to be protected just in case they're not around. And if they don't do it by their will, or there are no assets in their partner's name, then there's no protection really in place. If they are married, the spouse takes automatically a certain share of assets under almost any succession rules anywhere in the world. Question mark, is it something really desirable, especially in situations when it's a short marriage and there are children from previous relationships, and like in our case, there are grandchildren already. So on top of prenuptial and postnuptial agreement, although I know it sounds really sad, people have to think about their will, because prenuptial agreement only protects them in the case of divorce, but not in the case if they're not around anymore. So it doesn't help really. It doesn't address this issue. So once I spoke about this with a family lawyer to a very young lady who was about to get married, and she listened very attentively, and then when they left the room, her mother said it was really harsh, not only to talk about prenup, but also about the will with this young bride. And I said, well, unfortunately, that's what we lawyers do, because it's a part of your risk strategy. If you are aware of it, you can make a decision which helps you to be in control, which keeps you peace of mind.
Yeah.
So parents, probably they have their wills in place, maybe there is a family trust. Their new partners, are they covered or not? Something to think about. Their grandchildren, they have young grandchildren, and their daughter, who's now in the middle of quite a muddy situation. So again, would they like to leave their share of inheritance to her or to grandchildren directly? It's a good question to ask. And then Ekaterina herself, she's divorcing. It's a good reason to look back at her will if she has one. It's quite a common question. What happens? Well, automatically, actually, if divorce happens, her current husband will be out of the scene. So from legal point of view, he will be treated as if he has died before her when divorce happens. But even we would not recommend her just to rely on this rule. She should reconsider her succession plan altogether. And also, her new partner is coming in. Would she want him to inherit equally with her children or not really? So all these matters have to be addressed. Although it sounds a bit too much, but just believe me, I think women, when they think about children, they are worried too much sometimes about what can happen, and they don't know about many legal mechanisms which would allow them to protect their children, also protect possibly from. Some of them are coming to us saying, well, I don't really want my former spouse to take control over my assets if something happens to me, but he's a father, what do I do with it? And again, trust instrument can help in this case. So it is not desperate. There is a solution to any worry. So if it is expressed and thought of, and I think ultimately that's the whole idea of this conversation, be in control. And being in control means that we're less stressed about things. It's covered. This plan is done, dusted, put away in the cupboard, in the lawyer's cupboard in this case, and we can move on. So we can move on to financial planning.
Exactly. Yeah.
So let's talk about numbers. When you get, or if divorce ever happens, it's obviously a hugely painful emotional situation, but financially it's also difficult because you're dealing with something you haven't had to deal with before. You have to consider the actual finances that your family need in order to survive. So if you just go on to the next slide, much like Luba mentioned, we may not all be aware of just how much we're spending. So if we just look at two quick illustrations. The cost of private education in the UK. If you have 2 children and you have to put them through school, you need £1.5 million. We're not thinking about inflation here, we're not thinking about the tax bracket here. Those numbers would obviously double if we're talking about the UK tax bracket of 45-ish%. If we're thinking about our general expenses, clothes, accessories, looking at the glamour around the room, have a look at how much on average one could potentially spend. So the numbers are quite shocking if you haven't really taken the time to assess them. So this is how you take control of your finances. Think and plan. What is it that you spend? How much do you need to earn? If we go on to the next slide. It's quite shocking to think that it was only 44 years ago that women in the UK needed their husband's permission to open a bank account. Women don't need their husband's permission to open a bank account now. However,
44 years ago, imagine this.
Too few women
Yesterday.
Are taking control of their own finances. And especially, I think, in the cases of Russian wealthy families. When I started working at UBS 13 years ago, less than 20% of my obviously male clients had their wife on their account, either as a beneficiary or as a joint account holder. Those that did, it was in name only, the wife was never consulted or brought into any discussions. Luckily, that figure has changed. hopefully through our encouragement, maybe also through to some tax regulation. But we have many more clients who hold their assets on behalf of their family, and very good number of women who have their accounts with us who've made huge successes in their businesses. So what we would like to encourage you to do today and going forward is to own your worth. Know all about your finances. How much do you need? How much do you have? How much do you want to have? And if you see some of the questions here, what do you want to accomplish? Who are the people that you want to accomplish it for? And how do you plan to do that? So you have obviously the short term, liquidity, the long term, and the legacy following on for your children. Luba mentioned that it would be her husband who'd be able to answer all of the questions. So we would like to encourage you and everyone else to find your voice and have this discussion.
I come to you tomorrow.
Very good. And finally, like 77% of women, I think it is, to set an example for others. Encourage other women to find out what their financial situation is and to take control of it. So basically what we would like to do is encourage you and entice you to take control of your own financial well-being, to build your confidence and to be able to weather any storm, irrespective of what happens. It's not just markets that are unpredictable, people as well. We run programs for mothers and daughters to educate them in finance. We have social impact investing, charitable foundation establishment. So we would really like to help you however we can to find wherever it is that you'd like to improve your knowledge, confidence or future planning. Please feel free.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Alice. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Miranda and Elena. So and now I think that if you have any questions, it's a good time to ask. There are many important subjects, I think, covered today. So, yes, please,
Sorry,
Irina.
I missed it, but I was wondering, you mostly mentioned widowed or divorced women. Which initiatives do you have for single women who are not widowed or divorced? So basically, what do you build the future? Do you do planning?
Absolutely. So in fact, the Taking Action workbook and all of our programs are for women of any status or situation. So they help you to build your knowledge of financial markets. We help you to assess how you need to best manage your investments in order to achieve growth, preservation, whatever it is that you may be looking for. So by no means is this an exclusive divorcee or widow event or platform.
Thank you, Alice. Any other questions? Like personal questions?
Personal.
Yes, please, Irina. You see?
Regarding education, so where you do that? Like it's a course or, it's a private consultation?
We have various platforms. So obviously we do private consultations with our clients. We also have summer schools for children, courses that they go through to learn more.
For adults.
For adults as well, we have based on this workbook modules that we do.
I think you can send it to Irina, yeah?
Absolutely.
Tatiana. Yes, Tatiana. Mm-hmm.
We have a series of lunch discussions too through the year for women who just like to come in an informal environment and learn about different aspects of financial well-being, whether it's about sustainable investing or it's about nurturing financial confidence amongst our children, or it's about how to get actively involved in investing yourself. So a whole raft of different
But
sessions.
private one-on-one is something that we do a lot. So if that's where you feel most comfortable, that's possible. If it's a collective environment, that's available too.
And they have a wonderful art collection in their offices. I really encourage you to come. Any other questions? Yes, Irina, пожалуйста.
Do you have any special investment programs, or are they basically custom made to clients' wishes?
Absolutely, to your requirements and circumstances. So we have products that should hopefully suit all types of requirements.
Okay, and are there any specific amounts with which you start your investments?
We have a minimum account of 5 million.
Okay.
So like a women's club, yes, we will continue for sure. Yeah, because
Thank
it's
you
a,
very much.
yes.
Cool.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Teresa, of course, for hosting this and for providing us with this wonderful accommodation.